Victoria Male, nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. So lovely to see you too, Jennifer.
I know. I'm so glad that you're here in the space. I'm really excited for our conversation to just jump on in. Before we
Likewise.
do, for anybody who does not know who are you today?
No, but I'm Victoria Male. I'm a writer producer, and yeah, I just am out here in LA working as a screenwriter who tends to focus mainly on adaptations, which is code for I can't come up with an original plot to save my
I wouldn't belittle
life.
yourself in that way. I think it's more that there are a lot of ideas already created in the world, and why not see what we can do with the things that are already created? Maybe that's like a new spin on the way, you
I like
know?
it. I like it. No, but then I have a lovely writing partner who I collaborate with. So I have my own stuff and then I collaborate with him. And he's very much the ideas man. And then I go, okay. And then I'm the one who like translates it to screen. So
Amazing. Amazing.
we're leaning into our strengths.
Good. Yeah, when you have a partnership, that's what you need to be doing. Otherwise, why be in a partnership? I would think.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
I'm curious how you started getting into adapting. Obviously, you're like, okay, I don't have the ideas. I don't believe that. However, what about the adapting process was something that you were like, this is a jam that I think I could be jamming well at?
I think it was kind of two things that happened simultaneously. I think one was I would try to write a story, an original story, and then it would just be Moulin Rouge, like it would just be a jukebox musical
Yeah.
about like a courtesan. And then I think the my real first foray into adapting was I was in high school and I saw The Tudors and I had a huge crush on Henry Cavill, and but it really at first really got me excited and about Tudor history, looking into Tudor history, and then I discovered this amazing Tudor Duchess, Catherine Willoughby, who was a woman quite literally centuries ahead of her time, just in the way she lived her life, and loved and ran her household and fought for her beliefs. And I was like 15 at the time, but I said, "Oh my gosh, this has to be a story. Like this has to be a movie. Why hasn't
Mhm.
anyone made a movie about her yet?" And so I think that was the first time I was like, "Oh, I need to adapt something. I need to take somebody's life and bring it to the screen." And it was I always joke at Chapel Hill where I went to college, everyone else was writing probably stuff because everyone says write what you know. I don't know if I fully believe in that. I think you can write what you know, but disguise it as something else. I think that's
Yeah.
all actually a little healthier rather than exploiting like all your trauma. But I was it was funny because everyone's writing stories about their lives or like this cool concept. I'm like, the year is 1533. We're in the court of
Yeah.
King Henry VIII. So that's kind and then I just kind of learned all these tips and tricks, whether it was through school, taking some screenwriting courses at UNC, and then I worked in development for a really long time with Ivan Reitman, and got to learn just so much about the storytelling process through that before I went off on my own.
And so you caught the bug, and then the bug
Hmm.
continued. I guess, is it something
Yes.
that is like, what is the chicken or the egg in it? I think that's always the thing that I'm wondering with adapting, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm really into these kinds of stories or this period of history or, these
Hmm.
kinds of people. And then you find the things that fall into those categories. Or is it more like you stumble upon something and then it becomes, oh, I like this. And then I go, or is it both for you? Like, how does your process begin and end?
I think it's something it can go both. I think in the past it's usually been like the lightning bolt, like I'll stumble across somebody's life or a group of women, and then I'm like, oh, and then it's like that instinctual gut thing where you're like, oh
Hmm.
my gosh, this needs to be a story. Like, why hasn't anyone done anything about this? And then I Google to make sure no one's done anything about this, and then you would look into getting rights or you know,
Right.
Catherine Willoughby, the Duchess, has been dead for hundreds of years, so I don't have to worry about that so much. And then there have been other times, you know, the whole I was recently a Nickel Fellowship finalist with a script that I wrote about the making of Singing in the Rain. And that literally came from a walk around the Sony lot where I used to work, which also used to be the
Mhm.
old MGM lot, which is where they filmed Singing in the Rain. And I was thinking of a story that, because I'd gotten notes on another script from a really good friend of mine. He's like, Victoria, this is a good script, but you either need to focus deep and make this a feature, or if you want to do everything you're trying to cram into this 120 pages, it needs, if you want to do it well, it has to be a series. And for that particular idea, I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I want to do series. Because part of the reason I love this idea is because there's all these different things happening. And I was honestly just walking around the lot and I thought, Singing in the Rain and the Red Scare. And then I spent Christmas break seeing if there was any correlation between those two things. And turns out Gene Kelly's wife, Gene Kelly started singing in the rain, was blacklisted as a communist. And then it was just kind of going from there. And then also,
Mhm.
I mean, the other kind of thing is I love Greek myths, I love adaptation, or bringing like reimagining myths, because I think that's kind of what they're there to, they're what they're
Mhm.
there for. And then I think I'd been reading Madeline Miller's novels, Circe and Song of Achilles. Like, what's my version of this? Because she reimagined and brought those myths to life so beautifully. And I was like, I want to do that, but I can't do it like her because she's a goddess. And then I was like, I love My Fair Lady and I love the myth of Pygmalion because it's one of the only happy myths. What's my spin on it? And then kind of went from
Mhm.
there. So it depends. I think it's a case by case basis if it's the chicken or the egg.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting phenomena because, when many people think about writing, they think about creating out of their own gorgeous imaginations. And I think, r- but at the same time, we're seeing so many, I would call them adaptations and or
Yeah.
reinventing of the wheel that does exist. If we look at
Yeah.
Broadway, and there's so many stories of, books and or movies that have like then become the thing that now we're making into the next form of consumption, I'll call it. And so
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with it. I think when I think about writing, I think about, okay, creation from my own brain, but there obviously is something to be said about adapting material that has already existed. So, given that, I would love to dive into like that kind of process. For me, the first thing I think about is legality, which I know is probably like
Hmm.
a little bit further down if one actually has something that they're trying to make into something and make money off of it. And you're like, no, actually,
Hmm.
you're wrong.
No,
But
it's
I,
better to get that out of the way at the top.
yeah, well, I guess could we then let's do that so that I can focus on like
Mhm.
what it actually is to like do the creation part, because the legality part is
Yes.
where I'm like I have thought about it. I'm like, "Oh, I love this thing. I think this would be such a
Hmm.
really cool reimagining it, readapting it, whatever." But then I'm like going down the legal path feels like an absolute nightmare that I don't want to go do, and I'd rather just create something out of nothing. You pick an example that maybe will be helpful for a legal situation and we can run it from there.
Yeah, I mean, I can walk y'all through the process of how I got the rights to a book that I optioned,
Yep.
because that book published in 2022. So
Wow.
basically, I got the idea to, or not, I didn't really get the idea. It was funny. My writing partner and I had dinner the night before. Like, okay, we just finished our first script together. We didn't kill each other. Should we do this again? And the answer was
Yeah.
yes. And so we were thinking about what our next project could be. Literally, the next day, I was at my strike survival job and I stumbled across this all female gang in London from the 1920s. And I was like, oh my God, this is so me coded. I can't even.
Mhm.
And I instantly looked up to see if there was anything about them because I think there's a way of learning how to play the game a bit for Hollywood right now. I mean, again, I would love to just write a story about this gang, but at the same time, I know that it would be a stronger sell if I had a piece of intellectual property attached. So
Mhm.
I did a very quick Google search of the name of the gang. Two books came up. One was nonfiction, one was a novel. I'm very lucky that I am very close friends with a literary agent, but you don't need to know a literary agent. I basically just looked up the author of the novel, found her website, found who her book agent was, and emailed her out of the
Mhm.
blue saying, "Hi, I'm a writer producer. I just quickly wanted to check if the TV film adaptation rights were available for this novel." And incredibly, the agent got back to me right away. She looped me in with the film co-agent because sometimes
Mhm.
if you're dealing with book per se, there might be a couple people on the team. And then I brought in my manager and just to be like, yes, we're real people too. Don't worry.
Mhm.
And we did a meeting. My manager, my partner, and I with the book's film agent. We got the green light from her, and then my writing partner and I sat down with the author and just talked about our vision for what we would love to see this book become on screen and things like our vision and what the author, who's lovely, always dreamed of, aligned. And then we let the reps hash out a shopping agreement with as opposed to a full-on option, which is something, especially if you're not flush with cash, like all artists are right now. Um, it's a really helpful it's a helpful thing to do because it still gets you the exclusivity you need, but at the same time, you're not paying $20,000. You can shopping agreements tend to be a little less,
Well, break that down a
and
little bit. A shopping
yeah,
agreement versus an actual option. What is the
yeah.
difference?
I know the option gives you a little more ownership over the property, whereas a shopping agreement is almost but basically the tenets of our shopping agreement were we are the only people allowed to take this out to the industry, to the market for the next 18 months.
Oh, wow.
So it kind of gives you the exclusivity without having to fully own the property. And then
Does the
let's say we
shopping
sell it.
agreement yeah, let's say you
Yeah.
do get some traction in the 18 months, then that shopping agreement would potentially move into an option moment?
Yes. And usually it would be a buyer buying the option for you. So let's say we sold it to a streamer. The streamer then when we get into the deal making with the streamer, it's like, okay, how much is it gonna cost for us to completely own this? And then also you basically renegotiate your deals. Like how much is the author gonna get? How much are the writers gonna get? Shopping agreement is kind of like a really fun 18-month usual like freeze of I we paid the writer like a little chunk of money being like, "Hey, we love this. You love us. Here's some money for your beautiful book. We're gonna churn out a draft and a series, like a draft of a pilot and a series Bible of this, and then hopefully we have some really good news." It's just kind of a good way, especially for again when you're an emerging writer, to get yourself the exclusivity you need, and then
Mhm.
when it really comes down to brass tacks, to kind of let the people who know the legality and the finances a lot better do their thing. Also,
Yeah.
something that I remember my manager said, and I was really lucky that my mother decided she wanted to be a film investor, was, there's a way also if you don't have a couple $1,000s lying around, or your mother doesn't want to be a film investor, to get the rights for free, but for a shorter period. So I remember my manager last summer was mentioning, he's like, I've gotten something for 6 months for free because it's less of a commitment. You're taking, the book literally off the shelf for a shorter amount of time.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing that I'm hearing also is that simultaneously you're giving yourself a deadline. I think there's something about writing from one's imagination and or without, say, a grant or,
Mhm.
a a deadline from somebody outside of you that's telling you that it's due at a certain point, that if you have that if by the end of these
Yeah.
18 months you have not hustled in a very specific way, created something and been able to shop that around the best way that you possibly can given all your connections, then it in theory times out. And then all of
Yeah.
that was kind of for naught. Obviously, it could also be for naught if you do have those 18 months and you've also hustled and no one is interested. But assuming they were, like, it really, I would
Right.
imagine, does give you a structure to work from, and I think that is probably really helpful too.
It was so helpful. I think my writing partner would disagree, where he's like, she was breathing down my neck. But I think it kind of was a great lesson in what we can control and what we can't. I knew I can't control the market. I hate to say that out loud. I wish I could. I wish I had the magic
Yeah.
wand, but I said, because I've had other projects that have been out there for a while, and I just knew from the second our shopping agreement closed and both parties had signed, we needed to. The one thing we could control was how quickly we wrote.
Yeah.
So my whole life was 1920s London last fall, and I think we were really lucky and fortunate that our author was so great because also it was part of our deal that the author had to sign off on the pilot before we were allowed to take it out, as well as our
Mhm.
series Bible. And I think we were so, and I think this is also why it's really important to have a chat with the author or the original creator if that's available to you before you do it, because it was a very easy, not knock on wood, it was such an easy process. Like
Mhm.
our author had great notes, very minimal notes on the pilot, very easily implementable notes. And then, it wasn't this whole back and forth of like, no, but fix this. No, change this word to that. She was like, I think I want this, this, and this. And we said, cool, we got you, turned it around in like a week or two. And then she gave us our blessing. Um, so yeah, it's one of those things where there's a lot of, I just the easy part, oddly enough, is the writing of it, especially
Hmm.
because you have something to pull off of. I think Luke and I, my writing partner, we were able to grind out a draft really quickly because, the book did a great job of breaking the story for us. We
Yeah.
just kind of had to decide because we're adapting it as a TV series. Okay, where do we want the pilot to end?
Mhm.
So it's just, and that was, we made the most of our time too when we were going back with when before things were inked and settled. We read the book, we'd had these discussions. So, we were super prepared for our conversation with the author to present to her our vision. I made him make mood boards. I was up like at 6 a.m. my
Yes.
time, 2 p.m. London, like being on Canva, being like, we have to show her that we care.
Yeah.
And just to have everything like ready to go because I wanted to use as much like just to optimize as much free time as we could.
Well, then let's talk about the writing part itself for you. Okay, you've decided this piece. We can still continue with this example that's very real for you. What
Right.
exactly is the process? Obviously, you're reading the book, I would imagine, many times, probably ad nauseum. So hopefully, you pick something that you love and desperately want to keep going back to because you're so excited about learning more things every single time. Assuming that's the case and you've read the book a gazillion times, are you going, chapter by chapter and outlining it? Are you picking major themes and, trying to see which of those is the through line? Are you going
Mhm.
according to a character and their point of view and then seeing how you can make that the point of reference for every single event? Like, what is your particular angle into the writing?
Right. Those are all great questions. I think for us, for this specific example, we were we just kind of felt, and this is also just from coming because I've been writing for. I mean, I started screenwriting when I was in college, so I've been screenwriting for about 10 years, and then
Mhm.
half of that was eating and sleeping and breathing in story as part of the development team at the Montecito Picture Company. So I
Mhm.
think the great kind of pre knowledge of that was I know what a pilot's supposed to look like. And so when Luke and and this was something we were discussing before we even met with the author, like, should things go well, we're like, okay, it's a series, it's not a movie, because we love the world of this book so much. And we think
Mhm.
because they're based on real humans, there's actually a bunch of other things that they got up to that we can incorporate.
Mhm.
And then I think we were just kind of feeling things out. And then we decided, okay, well, the book is a season. I think the book is like the first season of a television show. And then from there, we could go back and be like, okay, I think the first 100 pages are our pilot. And luckily, in the book, it's so centered on the main character that that was
Mhm.
never really a discussion. And then it was, I mean, like a couple things that we did is like we, you first of all, like have to make peace with the fact that things are going to change.
Mhm.
That was something that Luke was really good about pulling me off of because I want to be a Girl Scout and do it exactly as it's written. And
Yeah.
Luke, it's like, no, like we don't need to.
Yeah.
Like it's this is the point. Like you're supposed to be change. It's okay that you might be changing things or
Well,
collapsing
is
things or
that
moving things
okay?
around.
I mean, I guess I don't know that, right? Like, so it's like if you have this
Oh
living, breathing
yeah,
writer who's there and you're
yeah,
taking their
yeah.
story, like, how do you know that you can change this or you can adapt this part or like this, but maybe this part has to stay exactly the same? Like, how are you to know?
I think it all depends on structure because a book is very different from a TV pilot, right? So I think things are just going to have to change. You
Mhm.
can't fully live in someone's inner monologue like you can in a book. So you're like, how can I do the most externally to communicate what
Mhm.
our author has spent 5 pages describing? I also think I have two quotes that kind of are like always in my head. One is from the brilliant playwright Octavio Solis, who said, "You are a dramatist first. You are a
Mhm.
dramatist first. So you are serving however is whatever is going to make this story work the best for the medium you are writing it in."
Yeah.
And some things have to change. Like we came up with a whole new, it was actually Luke's idea. We came up with this whole new teaser to start the episode, to start the pilot. And then technically the first scene of the book was our second or third scene of the pilot.
Mhm.
And part of the reason we did it is because Luke had a killer idea. But also it kind of set up the world really quickly and told us a lot about our main character really quickly. And you know what? The author was like, oh my God, that was so much fun. That was so cool
Mhm.
when she read it. And so I think also it's important when you're meeting with the creator, if you are meeting with them, to kind of see that's something also you can feel out. But the other thing I think about a lot too is I know you studied at ACT. I only went for the summer, but
Mhm.
David Keith at he was my teacher at ACT, and I just love where and I'm probably paraphrasing because it was 10 years ago, but he talks about how art is not reality; it's reality distilled, and I think we can transpose that to a book is not a movie, it's a move it's a book distilled, and it's your job to make this thing work for this new medium that you're transposing it into. So,
And
yeah, I think that's the most important thing is give yourself some and give yourself some grace. Again, we didn't stray too far from the book, but we felt safe in giving ourselves, some elbow room and some bumpers.
in the legality then of what you're setting up
Mhm.
from the get, again, my brain keeps going legal and I don't know where my head is at, but
Yeah,
here we are.
I love it.
Like, are you
No,
putting
I
that
love it.
in the
Very
shop?
Hollywood of you.
Very thank you so much. Are you putting that in, like, the shop agreement as well? Like, are you saying, "Okay, we have ability to adapt and or change details according to the medium that we're in?" Like, is that something that I know this is not like this is your reps who are putting the legal,
Yeah,
you know, actual
but I
verbiage,
did
but
read
is
it.
that
Yeah.
yeah, but is that part of, like, the agreement, which is we understand that in order to actually do this story, we have to potentially change some stuff so that it gives you the permission to be able to play?
I think that that really needs to be understood, and I don't think you should be in a shopping agreement or signing anything and giving anyone money if they don't understand that.
Okay, that's
And I
fair.
think that was kind of built also yeah, I mean, honestly. And that was kind of also built into the fact that our author had to approve the pilot and the series Bible
Right.
before we were allowed to take it out. So it was kind of like a fail safe for us to do whatever we wanted, but then also the author felt protected because we couldn't share it with the world and say it was based on her book without her looking over everything and
Right.
giving her feedback.
Okay. So you've gone through it. You decided you had the teaser that was a brilliant idea. You added that. You
Mhm.
had, you knew that the pilot itself was going to be the first 100 pages. Then are you
Yeah.
sitting in a room and you are putting post-its on a wall talking about the themes? Are you talking like are you doing it by
Mhm.
the dates because this is based off of a real gang? Like what are you doing in terms of the actual structure and actually writing the scenes? How do you prioritize what is most important and what isn't?
I think the most important thing, especially when you're going from a novel to a pilot, you're going from 30 pages of prose to about 60 pages of a script, is that main character and what their journey is. And then also that first little baby arc of the episode. And then also making sure you're including the things from the book or from your imagination that are going to help set the world of the series. So it's
Mhm.
very much a juggling act. I always always recommend that you make like a little cheat sheet. I know we were talking about this a little earlier, where before Luke and I really started, we had outlined and kind of took a second away from the book to sit with ourselves and be like, what do we connect with about this character? What do we think her big kind of arc should be for the pilot? And then I went through the book and I just broke it down through I just took every scene and was like, all right, so this like confrontation with this character happens from page 47 to 49. And then we learned this thing about that person on page
Mhm.
58. And it was so thankful. And I think it's a really good thing to do, even if you're doing somebody's life. When I wrote about Gene Kelly and the making of Singing in the Rain, I bulleted out when they shot what. And then with
Mhm.
Catherine Willoughby, the Duchess, I had all of her major life events bulleted out. And it's a way just to organize your thoughts for reference. So when you do feel afraid that you're straying a little too far, you can be like, whoa, 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 wait. But I think it should be a reference rather than like you're a slave to it.
Mhm.
Um, so we bulleted out, all the major events. We outlined the scenes of what we think the pilot should have looked like. We started writing it. We were lucky enough that I guess our planning was good enough that we mostly stuck to the outline. Some things changed. Some things were like, oh, we should add a little more here. Or we can actually
Mhm.
collapse that. And then all of a sudden there were 65 pages. It's not that easy, but it also like adapting is a muscle. So I think the most important thing is also do your research. I think that's also something that gives you a lot of
Yeah.
confidence to maybe stray from the beaten path or what's in the text or what's in the play you're adapting or what's in the movie you're transforming to a TV show, then into a video game, then into a Snapchat
Mhm.
filter. 'Cause that's
It's
what it
real.
feels like we're doing.
It's
No,
real.
no, no, but it's so real. But I think especially when I was writing, when we were writing about this group of women in the 1920s, we did some work of we actually read the nonfiction book, not that we optioned it, but we read it as research just to get a vibe of what 1920s South
Mhm.
London looked like.
Yeah.
And when I was writing about Singing in the Rain, I did all this research on a just the making of that movie, and then also the Red Scare and what the McCarthy sessions looked like. And so And then, when I was writing about the Tudor Duchess, I did all this work on what the Tudor period. So but I really stress that because when you stray from the path, it still feels like you're making a decision rooted in some sort of truth.
100%.
So it doesn't feel like, and then we're in space. Like it's not
Yeah.
that. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, we need to move things around a little. But remember that thing we read about upper class houses in the 1920s that, our girl steals from? What if we incorporated that and then we did this?
Mhm.
Cool, 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 cool. So
Yeah.
it's again, you're trying to like build your foundation so then you can let your imagination run wild a little bit as it's
Well, I was
supposed to
gonna
when you're
say
in
that.
play.
Yeah, because it's like if you're
Yeah.
adapting from something that's already been created, and I think this goes back to, like, me affirming you from the start of this whole conversation. It's like you do have creative ideas. I think a lot of that comes, I would
Yeah, thank you.
imagine, from the fact that you're giving yourself the world. We'd call it, like, the world of the play, but, like, the world of the
Yeah.
in this situation, the world of the TV show, right? Like, you're giving
Mhm.
yourself the world so that you have access to other things that aren't just solely rooted in the piece that you're adapting, so that you are able to play in that way. I think that's such a I mean, frankly, I believe research is really helpful no matter what you're doing, just so that you have
Yeah.
an idea of a lot more things and how do we continue growing and learning and unlearning unless we are doing research and really digging deep and trying to know more. And that's a whole other diatribe. But I think there's something
Yeah,
to be
right. That's
said,
another podcast.
you know,
Yeah.
very much. But I think there's something to be said about making that part of your process and recognizing that whether this
Mhm.
is based off of something fictional or nonfiction, like, and something very real and somebody real or some event that was real, there will always be something to pull from if you give yourself some sort of foundation in reality and or truth. And I guess, for me, the stories that are most impactful are the ones that, even if they are completely made up, even if we are in, say, space, or we
Mhm.
are, in some very, very futuristic, whatever that doesn't exist, like, there still is truth to that world that you've created. And in order to make the characters live and breathe like real human beings or whatever they are in the world, they need to actually be based in that world in a very truthful way. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's palpable when it's not. And so, yeah,
Oh,
including
yeah.
the research is 100% something to note.
Yes. And then 2 things just going off of that. I think 1, it's a like, that was a muscle I had to you get more and more comfortable with it, the more you do it. You get a better sense of, I'm just thinking like, well, how do you know? And I think me now, it's like, oh, well, you just know. Like you look at the structure and then you look what you're pulling from and then you make decisions. But me, when I was first writing The Duchess of Suffolk as a junior in college, I'm like, I don't know. Like I think I have to do
Yeah.
everything that she ever did and put that in there. And so it's something that you're going to build. And I think that's also why it was so important before Luke and I ever opened. Well, we don't really use Final Draft. We use Writer Duet because it's also tip. That's great for when
Yeah.
you're working with a partner because it's cloud. It's a cloud based, so you guys
Yeah.
can write at the same time. Before we ever opened a new document to start writing this pilot, we really took time to discern what we connected to about this character and about this story, and got really clear on our theme and our emotional truth because that's what's going to make the adaptation interesting and relatable, even if it is about a bunch of women who love to steal things 100 years ago, or it's about a bunch of, I don't know, like sentient seaweed in space 1,000 years from now. And I
Right.
think also, like I always joke that Showstopper, which is the Gene Kelly script, would have been a trivia clip show of my favorite fun facts if I didn't have that I found in my research. If I didn't have
Yeah.
I enrolled in a UCLA extension writing course to just get the first draft of the script out, which I can't recommend highly enough because you're getting guidance and you're getting accountability. And even if you're not in LA, I'm pretty sure they do a lot of online courses now. So it's just
Mhm.
giving you, it was just great. The only reason that I think that script's in fruition is because I knew I had to do 5 pages every week.
Yeah.
Anywho, but I had my instructor too being like, this is about a marriage set against this, not like about make them laugh and all I do dream of you. It's about this marriage that is playing out against these things. I was like,
Yeah.
right. Right. And then also, I think also the secret to what makes a good adaptation is what you're going to bring to it. It makes it your own.
Right.
Cause like, I just think of like, look at Elvis and Priscilla, Mirror, Mirror and Snow White and the Huntsman. There's Inglorious Bastards and Jojo Rabbit. There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat.
Yeah.
Forgive my rather graphic language, but it's the thing that's really going to make it's this weird thing, and I know it's the same in acting as well. It's like the more specific you get, the more universal you get, oddly.
Mhm.
The more you personalize it to you, I think oddly sometimes the more people can relate to it.
Well, it goes
So
back also
yeah,
to the
doing your
truth part of it all, right? Where it's like the
right,
more
exactly.
it's your version of what's exciting to you, what you're passionate about, what's truthful for you, given obviously, again, rooted in the facts in the world. But like that is the version of truth that you're resonating with. And so that's going to be palpable through your writing because it's yours. I think that is the thing too.
Exactly.
It's an interesting, we've had a lot of different episodes about writing on this podcast.
Hmm.
We haven't had one yet about adapting, which is why I'm super excited that you're here, but we have
I'm
talked
so
about like
excited to
how
be
do you
here.
start? Yeah. And how do you start? And how do you write a pilot? And how do you pitch that pilot? And how
Hmm.
do you like, what about character? We've had all of many, many versions of this kind of conversation. And I think the reason I keep bringing on different ways in for this is every single one of them always goes back to like what is your version of truth and how are you
Hmm.
communicating. And it's I think so many of us who are writers want to, and just generally as artists, like there's a part of us that like want to do it right, and then we have to remember that
Yes.
there's literally no rules whatsoever. Like we're literally in a creative space that is not like you must do med school and now you're a doctor. Like there is
Yes.
no real linearity to any of this. And so I think remembering that ultimately, if you are deciding this is the thing that I'm trying to adapt, or this is the story that is resonating with me, and this is why, then you sticking to that truth is fundamentally what is going to make your version of this adaptation yours and therefore special. It's the same kind of
Yep.
thing for anybody who's auditioning for like, I do this with master classes all the time when I give
Hmm.
like scene work and I give every single
Hmm.
person the exact same scene and and or monologue or whatever it is. And they're all like, but how do I make it interesting? Like that's a huge theme that comes up
Hmm.
all the time. Like, how do I make this interesting? What you're minimizing is the fact that you as a human being are the interesting part. Like every single person in that class is going to do it differently solely because you're different people. First and foremost, forget the interesting part. You will inevitably make interesting choices, whatever that in the quotations, interesting choices, which are
Yes.
just your choices. Like your choices will be different than the next person and so on and so forth. And therefore, every single one of those monologues are going to be completely different, not because the text is different, but because all of you are different. And so I guess I'm just
Exactly.
offering that as just the same, it feels like the same thing, which is like your version of this adaptation. And again, many people can adapt the same kind of story over and over and over again. We've seen it all the time. Like the reason it keeps happening is
Yeah.
because those versions of the thing feel authentically like the people who created them.
Exactly, and then I think also there's like it's a really interesting two-sided coin too. Not to negate anything you said about truth because I can't co-sign it loud like largely enough
Yeah.
in permanent enough ink.
Yeah.
But it's also also you are allowed to put yourself in it. Like when I talk about, especially when you're adapting something that's been around literally almost forever. It's like,
Mhm.
why do we keep I think Anyone But You wasn't it As You Like It? That movie with Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell? That was As You Like It. Like, they
Yeah.
literally have quotes, like, superimposed on, like, scenes of Sydney from the Shakespeare play, but they took that narrative structure of the play and then remixed it in a modern rom-com, and then I think About Me was Sculpted, like, part of what I brought to it was the fact that I loved this myth, but I didn't see myself in it. And I loved the retellings of the myth, whether, with Pygmalion, whether it was My Fair Lady or, I think of like Ruby Sparks, but I'm like, wait, why isn't it ever the woman creating the man?
Yes.
So it's also, it's, it's this weird thing of like, as long as you know what you're looking for, and I always say I can look at everything I've written and know what kind of thing or question I was working out when I was writing it. Like with the book, it was eldest daughter syndrome.
Yeah.
I suddenly totally understood my protagonist when I was like, oh, she is a beleaguered eldest daughter. I got this on lock. And
Mhm.
like, and then with my gender swapped Pygmalion or Pygmalia, it was how the heck do we balance if we want a partner and we want the kids and like the happy life that we were told, we're I don't want to say brainwashed, but that kind of society's modeled for us. But we also want to give time to our art. That's really hard to do. How does one do that? How does one reconcile those two things that almost require all of you? And then with
Yes.
Singing in the Rain, it was, and there's also all these different ways in. Like, this is going to sound like the most LA thing I've ever said in my life, but I understood Gene Kelly when I looked up his star sign, when I looked up his astrology. He was born on the cusp of Virgo and Leo, and I am a Leo sun and a Virgo moon, I'm like, "Oh my god, he's a show off perfectionist. I get
I love it.
it." Like, okay,
I love it.
I fully understand this man. And then that's the nice thing too, if you're basing it on history and like recent history, like you can use your own kind of ways you understand things and people. I once in a writing class had someone do like the, oh my god, the Myers Briggs for all their
Mhm.
characters, like INFP or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and like it's just because then it's an also really it's a great shorthand for yourself. Like when I was working on the Singing in the Rain project Showstopper, it actually really helped to know what everyone's sun sign was, and or for me at least, because I'm like, oh, no wonder Gene and his co-director was clashing. That was Leo Aries. Like, of course they didn't get along. And no, of course, after 10 years of marriage, the wife was like, what else is there? Because she's
Yeah.
a Sagittarius. Like, it's
That's
again,
really
like,
funny. I would
also just
never just so
because,
you know, I could never do that. I could
right?
never. I'd be like, a Gemini and a who? Like a what?"
I know, and but for me, I think it was like because you read. I think also because it was at a point too where I'd read all the books on Gene. I'd read Betsy, his wife at the time's memoir, and I'd read Debbie Reynolds' memoir, and I'd read there's literally like a textbook on the making of Singing in the Rain. And it's like, okay, how do I like process all this information in my
Yeah.
brain in a way that I can pull from? But yeah, I mean, who knew? I think poor Jean's probably rolling in his grave. She's like, this girl, he's like, this girl used what now to try to
Yeah.
understand me? How
But
many
it
years after
also
my death?
it makes me think, just going back a little bit too, it makes me think, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
Save the Cat, like just, classic
yeah.
screenwriting book, but there's the whole, chapter on genre and how
Mm,
ultimately you really can every single film, TV show that's ever been made, you can actually plug into one of the genres, in Save the Cat as like what kind of genre are we talking about here? And it's the
mhm.
same kind of thing as like, yeah, like As You Like It has been done 8,000 times, as has Hamlet, as has like we just take stories from the structures, the hero story, the Marvel breakdown. Like these are
Yes,
things
yes, yes,
the
yes.
structure has been done over and over and over again. And arguably that's kind of why people love certain genres is because you know that structure
Mhm,
so well and you're excited to see how this new thing fits into that kind of, build up. But I think again, like we're not exclusively reinventing the wheel every time. There's like wheels that have been made for a while and they're successful for a reason, and then learning what those
mhm.
wheels are to then make them your own in some way, but still keeping
Yeah,
wheels and not making I don't know what other I can't be making up something in the moment, but like something that gets you that is a wheel that
yeah,
isn't a wheel. Like like why?
exactly. No,
Um,
like, why would you if this round wheel is working, don't try to make it a square.
Correct. Yeah, and then try to have
But
to
you could, like,
troubleshoot the
put some cool
square.
rims on it.
100% and make it colorful and make it vibrant and make it big and small. I don't know, whatever. But yes. And
Yeah.
especially I would imagine if we're talking about adapting in this way, which is that
Mhm.
the wheel has actually been created and now you're making a different kind of wheel with this wheel. Like
Exactly, you're taking a
that is
bike to a truck. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. I'm curious, if there's anything else in terms of like the outline, the timeline breaking
Mhm,
that you're doing from the book. Are you also combining that when you're doing research with like a side by side of other things so that you have that to pull from? You kind of mentioned it, but how are you doing that
mhm.
structurally when you're also giving other things, not just the book?
I think mm, I think it's interesting. I think for for me, it's really just like what's a movie and what's a series. That's
Mhm.
kind of how I think of it. Like for the Tudor Duchess thing in the 1920s gang thing, the world was so interesting and it was so important to me, especially with female protagonists, to portray all aspects of themselves. And the only way you're going to have time to do that is if you have more than 2 hours. So I think for me, for structure, I love Save the Cat. Like I'm sorry, I
Mhm.
love that 15 beat sheet. It's my North
Yeah.
Star. Um, you know, pilots look a little different, but you are. It's just, but it's not that different. I don't know. That's a hot take. That's a controversial take. It's like it's really not that different. Yeah,
I
maybe
mean,
the
but
act outs are different, and you.
are you, like, taking the, like, research that you find, and are you putting it
Mhm.
side by side with it? Are you creating like, I
Yeah,
mean, like, actually logistically, are you putting, like, a separate document of this is stuff from the world that I've, found that I
yeah.
think is interesting I might pull from? Are you incorporating it simultaneously as it matches up with details of the world that you've already created? What are you doing?
Yes and no. Like I went through when I was doing kind of like my overview of research of let's just say 1920s London of this group of
Mhm.
thieves. I was going through things and highlighting and oh, this is really cool. I want to remember this for later. What if they did this? But then there were certain things as I was writing, it's just funny too. Like, and also like this is hopefully, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's just that you don't have to know everything. Cause Luke and I would be like, there were buses back in the 20s, right? In London, like, and then you just Google it. Thank God for. So it can be, I think for me, it's more important to really go deep and do that separate document about who you're telling the story about. And then anything that's really important about informing what you want to portray with the story, and then what like the character's point of view would be. Like especially when I was writing about the Duchess or these women in the 20s, it's like what was the social mores of women at the time? Like how were women viewed? What were their roles? But then I think as you're writing, now because we live in the 21st century, it's very easy if you're looking for a cool detail to fill in those gaps. What's your need at the moment?
Yeah. Okay. So you have, let's say we're skipping through the actual like writing of it because
Right.
it's pretty much there. You're filling in your blanks with research or with, your own beautiful creativity. You
Hmm.
have the materials.
Hmm.
Now, how does it work? Obviously, again, we kind of talked about, you have your shopping agreement versus your optioning of it,
Hmm.
but like, how does it work in terms of moving this forward? Is it the same kind of thing that you would with an original idea? It just happens to have a little bit more people involved? Or is it, like, what is that process once you have this in your hands?
For us, it's been very similar. I think also something I can't, even if you just do the 30-day free trial of IMDb Pro, something we were doing for the whole time through ideating and writing and then getting ourselves ready is researching people, especially because Luke and I are emerging writers, who could be our showrunner for this,
Mhm.
who would be good production companies to take this to, and who would be maybe good actresses to star in this. And the way, I mean, there's also, you can just like, oh, I love I love Jennifer Apple for this. Like, she should do it. And then you put her on the list. But
Please
then
put me on
also
the
it's
list. Thank you so much. I can
please,
do an
no, please.
amazing dialect if you need it. Great. So
Awesome.
call me.
Noted. Writing it down. But no, also I think there's a lot of weirdly, I think the thing that I don't love about Hollywood is like give us more but the same. So it's like, okay, who were the people if I'm thinking about 1920s gang London, like, all right, who are the people who did Peaky Blinders? We should probably take
Mhm.
this project to them. Who are the people who did Orange is the New Black? About these kind of complex women and who
Mhm.
aren't just perfect wives and mothers. Let's take it to them. Who does a lot of female led stories? Which actresses have their own production companies and could play the
Yeah.
heavy in this and then get to own the series and produce it? But then they don't. They get to play the heavy in a really cool role, but they're not the lead and they don't have to be on set every day.
Yeah.
And then I love like most people, like it's like you go down a YouTube hole or Wikipedia hole. It's very easy to do that on IMDb Pro, and I
Yeah.
highly recommend that when you're kind of working with you and your rep and your writing partner. Our author has kind of been like, this isn't really my thing, so you all go when we're making our list of like who we want to take this to. And then obviously there's relationships that come into play. Like, oh, I know this person's production company. We should go in there. And Luke has a really great relationship with these folks in the UK. We should take it there. And but it's pretty much all the same. I think or at least in my experience, I think it's very different when you're doing Rocket Man and Elton John's producing the thing.
Right.
Then it's just like, let's take it to the buyers and make sure we can get the 40 million we need to make this.
Yeah. But I think it's something really important to remember, which is the scrappiness of it all and also
Mhm.
just the intentionality behind it. Like I think you understand very deeply what this story is, the world of this story again, and therefore
Mhm.
who are the people who are in alignment hopefully with the kinds of story that you are telling, and I think people forget that not everybody is their people. I think about that all the time. It's kind of how I like operate my life.
Mhm. You have to,
Like
or else
you
you're
have
gonna
to,
go no.
yeah,
No.
100%. Like a no often, is a version of a yes because now I get to close
Mhm.
the store and say thank you so much for your time. Actually, thank you so much for communicating, let alone responding. It's so kind of you. So now I actually have
Yeah.
some sort of information that I can now close the store. And also there's a reason probably that this wasn't my time and place and room to be a part of for X, Y, and Z reasons that I probably will learn in due time and usually do. And
Mhm.
the disappointment and like, oh, but this person, I wanted them so badly. probably wouldn't have been your best match anyway. And so to really find those like-minded people who are going to believe in this idea as much, if not more than you, and then take it to the next step. I love that as an approach, because you're really trying
Mhm.
to not just get it made for the sake of getting it made. You're trying to get it made by people who also love the vision behind it and will treat it as well as you did and want to do it, like, and want to
Right.
bring it to life in a beautiful, gorgeous way.
I mean, it takes too much blood, sweat, and tears in your whole heart to, like, do it just for the sake of getting it made. Like, because
Yeah.
also these things, like, Showstopper has been with me since 2019. Like, I started writing that in 2019.
Yeah.
These things can be 5 to 10-year journey, so you have to love it. And then my other little trick is, I mean, I grew up acting, I worked in casting for a while, and then also in development, you're kind of thinking who would be an interesting choice for this. There you have, like, your usual suspects, again, if we're using the 1920s gang piece, like, okay, who can kind of do, like, gritty period drama? This
Right.
girl, like the girl from Saltburn, blah, 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 Jennifer Apple, obviously. And then
Clearly.
but then also think clearly, sorted, as the Brits say. No, but then there's also, like, who's done a bunch of comedy and they're a good actor, so you can kind of be like, oh, they're going to want to do drama next, like, and that's
Yeah.
something that's like great ammo as a actor that you can use, or someone who's also been a creator, like, where or in this capacity, because I think I've had people who are like, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I've had certain companies and certain talent that I've met with or I've developed a relationship with because I was like, "No, no, no, we should go to them," and it didn't make perfect sense on paper, but thankfully I have a very nice manager
Yeah.
who very much treat each other like partners, and if I bother him about it enough, and then all of a sudden there's a meeting, and I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah." Sometimes it's like that
Yeah.
again, it's like this weird thing of giving yourself a foundation of research and truth, and then getting solid in that, so then your gut can tell you when to
Yeah.
take a risk.
Yeah.
Oh, I think something too that's really important, again, back in, like, the macro stage, take some time to let things marinate within you and find the best way of it coming out, and giving yourself grace that it might change, like, Duchess of Suffolk, which I think is, like, a very feminist piece, like, very much started as probably, like, teenage tutor fan fiction,
Mhm.
and so we trust the process and the evolution of that. Also know that with this book that I was working on, that I had to do a closer based on adaptation of, because we had the rights to the book. But don't deny yourself an inspired by, because that gives you a lot more space to just let your
Mm.
imagination run wild, and then you don't have to adhere so closely to the original
Mhm.
story or text or whatever it is.
Is that process similar to what you have done with, like, a more direct adaptation, which is like,
Mhm.
"Hey, person who has this book, for example, we really wanna do a piece
Yeah.
inspired by your thing. Now let's create, again, like, a shopping agreement for an inspirational piece based off of the thing that is the same kind of structure?"
I think that depends. I think you're still gonna have to do a based on if you're gonna go to the actual creator and pay them money and
Yeah.
sign paperwork. Well, when I think of inspired by, I think of, like, Pygmalion, Shakespeare. Also, something to know, and I don't know the particulars of this, but with public domain, just knowing that it's, copyright reverts into the public domain in America.
Mhm.
Um, it's the duration of the author's life and then 70 years after their death, which is why,
Yeah.
like, John Oliver right now is having a field day with Steamboat Willie and Disney because that just enters the public domain.
Yeah.
And
Or
then with
like how The
life
Great
rights,
Gatsby is having, like, a full 800 different Broadway productions because that also just recently entered the public domain. Yeah. Mhm.
yes. So
Yeah.
no, and that's where it's, and also, certain things, if you don't, maybe it's like a book, again, a book that came out in 1970, maybe we're not fully out of the public domain yet. If you want to do something that's not as close, I think it's also just giving yourself permission that if you just like the kernel of an idea of something, and then some, like, especially like if that's a Shakespeare play or a myth or a song. I mean, songs are different. Oh my god, my strike survival job was in don't do a song. My strike survival job was in music supervision. You think the legality of movies are intense? Music,
Yeah.
ah,
Yeah, I feel
scary
like
stuff.
anytime you put anything even on, like, on your social media, it's like if you use a clip of something and you're singing it even off key, they're gonna be like, "You and you're like, "But I was terrible.
No,
Why?" Yeah, don't
yeah,
do it.
no, but it was 10 seconds and I was having a good time doing it a cappella. No, yeah, no.
Exactly.
But again, if it's just kind of, or that's another thing you can option, articles, who knew? Adaptation doesn't need to be I am writing this exactly. I'm just literally transposing this book
Mhm.
to a TV series. It can be interpreted in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. I love that permission just to yeah, because inspiration comes from everything. Like the amount of times that I've in my life read, say, an article and been like, whoa. And then I just let it go into the ether and I don't think much about it. But it's like if I allowed myself or gave myself permission to really think about, like, well, why do I find this interesting? Why do I find this is something that's I cannot get out of my brain? And if I were to think and continue going down this train of thought, like, what else can I glean from this? And now this is a whole other idea. I think there's something about just that as a creative process that is really
Mhm,
fascinating to allow oneself to be inspired by the thing and allow that as the jumping off point without even necessarily thinking, okay, now in 2 years I'm going to be optioning this for a movie. Like I think it's just like the action of this is inspiring. Now what can I bring from my imagination to this? And if I were to make it into something down the line in theory, then I can talk
mhm.
about what it means to be based off of or, obtaining rights and
Inspired
yada yada
by
yada,
or
inspired by.
yeah, do I
Mhm.
need to pay someone money and
Exactly.
yeah, for sure,
Exactly.
and I think also to, amend my self-deprecating statement at the beginning of our time,
Good, we have some
I
growth.
uh, maybe it's not that I don't have original ideas, it's just I love a
No.
prompt. My little
Yeah.
brain loves a prompt. I love a
Yeah.
jumping off point because I don't think you can create in a vacuum, so I love a prompt.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that reframe, so yay for a growth moment, we're here for it.
It's growth.
Um, it's great, it's really, really good. I'm super grateful that you were, willing to go down this journey and just share, your process with listeners and,
Yes.
and being candid about how you work. I think again, everybody
Mhm.
works differently. And so just hearing different perspectives is really important, I think, as us artists navigate through all of it to remember that
Yeah,
again, there is no one way to do it. So thank you so much for sharing. For anybody
it's
who
my
wants
pleasure.
to reach out to work with you, to read your stuff, to, buy your things, what within the best way of your boundaries is the best way for people to reach you? Great.
You're kidding, I'm kidding.
I live here.
Um,
Here's my address.
yeah, this is
Great.
my address and my I'm just gonna throw in my social for fun.
Amazing.
No. No. I am repped with Cameron Hubison, at Zero Gravity Management. But if you don't know how to spell Hubison or Cameron, I think the best place to start is my website, victoriamale.com. My last name is very weird and truncated Italian. So it is Victoria, like the Spice Girl. And then M is in Mary, ALE.com. And then I am on Instagram at victoriamale1, the number one. And then on X or Twitter or whatever the foo, pity foo we're calling it, is at Victoria Male.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being in this space.